In the heart of Lagos, amidst the noise of honking cars, the chatter of hawkers, and the glaring lights of towering buildings, there stood a man at the crossroads of destiny. Tariq Akintoye, the CEO of one of Africa's leading aerospace companies, gripped the edges of the conference table in his opulent boardroom. His usual composure had evaporated, and his hands trembled ever so slightly. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and his eyes, once sharp and calculating, were now clouded with exhaustion. 48 hours, he muttered, his voice quivering. 48 hours until we lose everything. The contracts, our reputation, our place in the industry. Everything we've worked for, gone. The engineers in the room sat in stunned silence. Their faces were etched with anxiety, their minds swirling with complex calculations on the whiteboard in front of them. Red lines cross and recross like a battlefield, arrows shooting off in every direction. The pressure to fix a catastrophic engineering failure weighed heavily on everyone. Tariq's gaze shifted around the room, from the youngest engineers to the seasoned experts. No one had an answer. There were no solutions, only mistakes. Every attempt to fix the issue seemed to make it worse. The room felt suffocating, as if the very air was closing in on them. The weight of failure pressed down on their shoulders. Then, just when the tension seemed unbearable, a voice broke through the suffocating silence. It was low, steady, and entirely out of place. "I can correct it." Heads turned sharply toward the doorway, where a man stood, a stranger, his coat ragged and dust clinging to his worn shoes. His hair was untidy and his beard unkempt, a stark contrast to the polished suits and pristine attire of the engineers and executives in the room. He was middle-aged, with a deep, calm gaze that seemed to pierce through the walls of the boardroom and see far beyond the surface. The security guards at the door moved instinctively, ready to remove the intruder, but Tariq, weary and desperate, lifted a hand to stop them. "Wait," he commanded. The man, standing with a brown bag clutched tightly to his chest, moved forward. His eyes didn't waver. He walked straight toward the whiteboard, his every step purposeful. He stood before it for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts, then turned to face the room. "I can correct it," he repeated, his voice calm and unwavering, even in the face of mockery from the engineers who exchanged confused glances with one another. The disbelief was palpable, but Tariq, for reasons he couldn't quite explain, felt a flicker of hope, a faint spark that had been long absent. He waved for the stranger to come closer. "You think you can fix this?" Tariq asked, his voice tinged with skepticism, though beneath it lay a trace of desperation. The stranger gave a small nod. "I know I can." The engineers scoffed under their breath, some shaking their heads. The man's audacity seemed ridiculous. A homeless beggar, with no credentials, no background, no place in their world of calculations, standing there as if he could simply solve their problems. "Who are you?" Tariq asked, his tone weary but still holding a sliver of curiosity. "Jide," the stranger said, offering only his first name. He didn't say much else. He didn't need to. He turned his attention to the whiteboard, picked up the marker, and stood still for several seconds. Without uttering a word of explanation, he began to erase the chaos of crossed-out arrows and incorrect calculations. The room fell into a quiet stillness as he worked, the only sound the sharp swish of the marker against the board. He drew a clean line, simple yet potent. He added equations, quietly explaining each one as he went. "When the plane feels many small shakes," he said, "this little sensor thinks the nose is too high. It panics. The autopilot pushes the nose down too quickly, and the pilots fight against it." Tariq watched him, transfixed by his calmness. The engineers murmured in disbelief at first, but then leaned in, intrigued despite themselves. "The solution is simple," Jide continued. "We slow the panic by adding a filter. The sensor checks with two others before it acts. If they agree, it acts. If not, it waits. We teach the system patience. He continued to draw, making complex ideas look effortlessly clear. The engineers were silent, pens poised in midair, watching the stranger with growing fascination. One engineer finally asked, "What if all three helpers fail?" Jide's answer was simple yet profound. "They won't. Not often. And when they do, we add a heartbeat checker. We ensure the pilot has control before the system panics." A stillness settled in the room, the kind that comes when everything aligns. The engineers, once skeptical, now exchanged glances of disbelief. Could this man, this beggar, really have the answer they had been searching for? Tark leaned in, his eyes now fixed on Jide, studying him carefully. He knew this moment could change everything. I think you may have just saved us," Tark whispered. The engineers quickly got to work, drafting new models and refining the system based on Jide's instructions. But Tark lingered. He couldn't tear his gaze away from the man who had, in just a few minutes, turned everything around. The room buzzed with activity, but his mind was elsewhere, caught in the weight of what had just happened. Jide had saved the company. That much was clear. But there was something more about the man, something deeper, that Tark couldn't ignore. As the team worked to put Jide's solution into motion, Tark couldn't help but wonder why someone like Jide, someone who had clearly been through so much, was willing to step in and offer his help. The calm, humble manner in which Jide had walked into their world, without arrogance or expectation, left Tark in awe. He waited until the room had emptied, until the engineers had gone to their respective stations to implement the new plans. Only then did Tark step toward Jide, who was still standing by the whiteboard, his face impassive. His brown bag was still clutched tightly in his hands, as if he feared it might slip away. "You've done more than save our company today," Tark said, his voice soft, a hint of something more in it. "You've done something I can't quite explain." Jide looked at him, his gaze steady, almost as if he could see through Tark's carefully constructed walls. There was no excitement in his eyes, no sense of victory, just a quiet understanding. "I didn't come here to save anyone," Jide said simply, his voice steady but carrying a weight that made the words linger in the air. "I came because I saw something you didn't. That's all." Tark, taken aback by the sincerity in his voice, leaned in slightly, his eyes locking with Jide's. He could feel the tension building between them, something unspoken, something that had been growing ever since Jide had walked into that boardroom. "I don't understand," Tark murmured. "You saved us. You saved everything." Jide's lips parted, and for a moment, Tark swore he saw something shift in his eyes, a vulnerability that was rare, even in someone who had already given so much of himself. "I didn't save you," Jide said, his voice softer now. "I saved the plane. What happens next is up to you." Tark was quiet for a long moment, considering his words. The weight of Jide's statement settled in him like a knot in his chest. What did he mean by that? What could a homeless beggar, someone who had once lost everything, possibly know about saving him? Tark, the man who had everything. But as Jide turned to walk toward the door, his brown bag slung over his shoulder, Tark's feet moved almost instinctively. Without thinking, he reached out and caught Jide's arm. "I don't want you to leave," Tark said, his voice low with an edge of something, an emotion he hadn't expected. Desire? Longing? He didn't know, but it was real. There was something about Jide, something raw, that called him in ways he had never experienced. Jide turned slowly, his gaze meeting Tark's, and Tark could see the questions in his eyes. Jide wasn't the type to let emotions spill over. He was reserved, careful. But Tark, in that moment, knew that Jide's walls were just as fragile as his own. "I'm not asking you to stay because of the company," Tarek continued, his words thick with the weight of unspoken things. I'm asking because I don't know. I feel like I need to understand you. I need to understand what you've been through. Jide was quiet for a long time, his eyes unreadable. And then, almost as if in a moment of surrender, Jide spoke again, his voice softer, deeper. Sometimes, he said, his hand lightly brushing over the brown bag he carried, we lose ourselves, and we end up in places we never thought we'd be. But we survive. That's all. Tarek swallowed hard, tried to make sense of what was happening between them. Jide's words seemed to echo through him like a drumbeat, constant, relentless, yet strangely comforting. The silence that hung between them was heavy, but not uncomfortable. It was as though they both knew that something had shifted, but neither was yet ready to name it. Tarek finally broke the silence, his voice soft and raw. I can't keep asking you to help me fix things. You've already done more than I could ever repay. But I need you to stay. I don't know why, but I do. Jide's expression softened, the slightest smile tugging at the corner of his lips. He gave a small nod, almost as if an acknowledgement, before turning his gaze back to the door. I'll stay, Jide said quietly. But you should know, you got a lot of fixing to do on your own. Tarek didn't answer. There was no need to. He could feel it in the air between them, the first spark of something real, something deeper. It wasn't about the company anymore. It wasn't about the engineering failures or the success of the simulation. It was about something far more personal. Jide walked toward the door, and as he did, Tarek followed. The air between them crackled with unspoken words, a tension so palpable it seemed to wrap around them. Tarek could feel the weight of Jide's presence, steady, unwavering, yet somehow fragile. He wanted to know more. He wanted to dive deeper into the mystery of the man who had saved him. But most of all, he wanted to feel what it was like to be seen, truly seen, for the first time in a long while. The days after the simulation's success felt different in the aerospace headquarters. The once doubtful engineers now moved with purpose, their confidence renewed by the brilliance of Jide's solution. Tarek observed it all from his office, watching the machines were to life, the teams working tirelessly to ensure the changes were implemented. Yet, amidst the productivity and the momentum of success, Tarek couldn't shake the sense that something deeper had begun to unfold. Jide, though no longer a stranger, remained an enigma. He was always present in the background, a steady fixture in Tarek's life. But his presence felt like more than just professional necessity. The conversations between them, while sparse, had a weight to them that neither of them had fully explored. Tarek had invited Jide to stay at his private residence after the board meeting, the words spilling from his lips before he could think twice. Jide hadn't hesitated to accept. He wasn't the type to beg, nor was he the type to look for handouts, but there was something about Tarek's invitation that spoke to him on a deeper level. Perhaps it was the fact that Tarek didn't look at him like a beggar, didn't treat him as someone undeserving. There was a quiet, unspoken respect between them, and for the first time in a long while, Jide had let his walls down just enough to see what was possible. They sat on the expansive balcony overlooking the sprawling city of Lagos, the night air cool and soothing against their skin. Tarek's penthouse, with its sleek design and panoramic views, seemed like another world compared to the streets Jide had known for so long. And yet, in the presence of man beside him, the grandeur of it all felt secondary. Jide leaned back against the railing, his eyes on the horizon. Tarek, ever the curious observer, watched him, feeling the shift in the air between them. There was something in the way Jide held himself, so self-contained, so controlled, that made Tarek yearn to understand him more. What was it like? Tarek finally asked, breaking the comfortable silence between them. When everything fell apart, what did you feel? Jide turned his head slightly, his gaze meeting Tarek's, but he didn't respond immediately. Instead, He let the question hang in the air between them. It was an invitation, not a demand. Tark wasn't asking out of pity. He was asking because, in some unspoken way, he wanted to know Jiday's truth. He needed to understand what made this man so different, so strong, yet so quietly vulnerable. Jiday shifted slightly, his shoulders tensing. He didn't speak for a moment, his thoughts clearly elsewhere. But then, with a quiet exhale, he began. It was the silence that got me first. Jiday said softly. His voice held a quiet power, one that resonated deep in Tark's chest. You lose everything, and suddenly the world around you doesn't make sense. People stop seeing you. They stop acknowledging you. And all that's left is the noise inside your head, the second-guessing, the questioning of who you were, who you become. Tark felt a pang in his chest as Jiday's words hit too close to home. He was a man who had built an empire. But even with all his success, there were moments when he felt the crushing weight of loneliness and emptiness. He had surrounded himself with people, with wealth, with a facade of control. But at the end of the day, he was just as lost as Jiday, just as desperate to be understood. Did you ever think you wouldn't make it? Tark asked quietly. Jiday turned his gaze back to the city, the lights below flickering like stars in the night. Every day, he replied, his voice steady but laced with an undercurrent of pain. But sometimes you have to hit rock bottom to find reason to keep going. And you don't always find it in the places you expect. For me, it was in the quiet moments, the ones where I thought I'd lost everything. That's when I found the strength to stand up again. Tark nodded slowly, letting the weight of Jiday's words sink in. It wasn't just about survival. It was about finding meaning in the aftermath. It was about facing the depths of despair and still choosing to rise. The conversation shifted then, moving away from past hurts and into something new, a space where there were no longer two men from vastly different worlds, but two people who share a moment of understanding. Tark couldn't quite explain it, but something had changed between them. They were no longer strangers. There was an unspoken bond now, a connection that reached beyond words. As the night deepened, Tark found himself sitting closer to Jiday, the distance between them shrinking with each passing moment. The cool breeze brushed against their skin, but the warmth between them was undeniable. Tark had spent years building walls around his heart, around his life. But now, for the first time, he felt something that he hadn't felt in a long while, trust. And with it, a desire that stirred within him, quiet but insistent. He glanced at Jiday, his breath catching in his throat. The man had become more than a savior to him. He had become something more. There was a pull, an attraction that Tark couldn't deny, and it was growing stronger by the second. Jiday, sensing the shift, turned to face him fully. Their eyes locked, and in that moment, the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them. The tension was palpable, and Tark could feel his heart pounding in his chest. There was no turning back now, no pretending that this connection wasn't real. Jiday took a step closer, his presence overwhelming in the best possible way. Tark's breath hitched as Jiday's hand reached out, fingers brushing softly against his cheek. The contact was electric, sending a jolt of warmth through him. For a moment, they simply stood there, locked in a gaze that said everything their words could not. And then, without another word, Jiday closed the distance between them, his lips finding Tark's in a kiss that was soft at first, tentative, exploratory. But as the kiss deepened, it became something more passionate, raw, and full of the hunger that had been building between them for days, for weeks. The world outside the balcony faded away. All that remained was the heat of their bodies, the gentle slide of their hands, and the quiet understanding that they had found something in each other that neither had ever expected. As the night stretched on, the world outside the penthouse seemed like a distant memory. The lights of Legos flickered far below, but the world within the walls of the room had narrowed to just Tarek and Jide, their bodies intertwined, each breath more urgent than the last. The kiss between them deepened, filled with the raw emotion that had built between them over the past few days. Each moment connection, each shared word of pain and triumph. Tarek felt a rush of heat spread through his chest, the intensity of the kiss grounding him in the present, making everything else fade into the background. Jide's hands moved slowly, almost reverently, as if he were memorizing every curve, every inch of Tarek's body. His fingers trailed down the side of Tarek's neck, and Tarek let out a soft sigh at the sensation. It was as if each touch was a key unlocking something deep inside him, a desire he had never fully acknowledged until now. There was no urgency, no rush, just a quiet, magnetic pull between them, as though the universe itself had conspired to bring them to this moment. Tarek's hands, trembling slightly, slid down Jide's back, feeling the smoothness of his skin beneath his fingertips. He had seen Jide from afar, admired his resilience and quiet strength, but this was different. This was not just admiration. This was the undeniable attraction to a man who had seen the deepest corners of despair, yet still stood with unwavering resolve. Tarek felt a deep ache in his chest, an ache for the man before him, for the shared vulnerability, for the feeling of being seen in a way he had never experienced before. When they finally broke the kiss, their breaths mingling in the stillness of the room, it felt as if the air itself had thickened with desire. Jide's eyes, dark and intense, met Tarek's, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The words were unnecessary. Everything they needed to say was there, in the quiet understanding that had formed between them. Jide's voice was low and rough, his words just a breath against Tarek's ear. "Are you sure about this?" Tarek swallowed, his heart hammering in his chest. He had always been a man of control, of logic, of restraint. But in this moment, there was no room for control, no room for hesitation. Only the burning need to be with this man who had brought something into his life he had never known: trust. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," Tarek murmured, his hands sliding up Jide's chest, feeling the rapid rise and fall of his breath beneath his fingertips. "But I need to know you're here with me, Jide. Not just for tonight, but for everything. For the mess I am." Jide looked at him, his expression softening, and for a moment it was as if time stood still. There was no judgment in his eyes, only acceptance, a silent promise that whatever this was between them, it was real. It wasn't just about tonight. It was about something more. "I'm here," Jide whispered, his lips brushing against Tarek's once more, this time slow, deliberate. "And I won't leave. Not this time." As their kiss deepened again, the world around them seemed to disappear entirely. The pain, the loss, the struggle, all of it melted away as they came together in a way that was both passionate and gentle, each touch speaking louder than words ever could. Tarek felt the weight of Jide's hands on his body, the heat of his skin, and he knew, without a doubt, that this was exactly where he was meant to be. Their hands moved with purpose, peeling away the layers that separated them until all that was left was skin against skin, heart against heart. Tarek could feel Jide's pulse beneath his fingers, steady and strong, and for the first time in a long time he felt grounded, like everything for once was exactly as it should be. As they lay together, their bodies intertwined on the soft, cool sheets of the penthouse bed, the world outside no longer mattered. There was only the warmth of Jide's body against his, the softness of his lips on his skin, and the undeniable connection that had formed between them. Jide's hand trailed down Tarek's side, his touch light but possessive, as if memorizing the feel of him. Tarek's breath hitched as he leaned into the touch, his body arching slightly in response. Every kiss, every touch, felt like a piece of the puzzle falling into place. They were two halves of something whole, two people who had suffered in different ways, but found solace in each other's arms. The night stretched on, but it was no longer just about physical desire. It was about connection, a bond forged in the depths of vulnerability, pain, and yearning. Tark had spent his life hiding behind walls, building empires and acquiring wealth. But in this moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was a man beside him, the one who had shown him what it meant to truly live, to truly feel. And as their bodies moved together in a dance as old as time, the world outside remained forgotten. This moment, this connection, was all that mattered. The night was theirs. The soft, rhythmic sound of their breaths filled the quiet room, each exhale heavier than the last, as if the weight of the moment itself demanded release. Their bodies, still intertwined under the cool sheets, now lay still, but the heat between them had only intensified. Tarek's fingers gently traced the lines of Jide's back, the smooth skin under his fingertips sending waves of sensation through him. It was a tender act, one that said more than words ever could. Tarek's mind, which had often been clouded with ambition, now felt clear. The weight of his life, the years of solitude, of pushing people away, of fearing true connection, seemed to dissolve in the warmth of Jide's embrace. He felt seen, truly seen, in a way he had never experienced before. Jide wasn't just a man who had saved his company. He was someone who had pulled him out of his own self-imposed isolation. Tarek had been running from vulnerability for so long, but in Jide's arms, it wasn't a weakness. It was a strength. Jide, for his part, seemed equally transformed. The man who had once lived in the shadows of his own grief, who had hidden himself from the world, was now open, vulnerable, raw, and willing to share the parts of himself that he had once buried deep within. The quiet moments they shared now, the way their bodies moved together, were more than just physical acts. They were the expression of a deeper emotional connection, a bond that had been forming between them from the very first moment they had met. Tarek's lips brushed softly against Jide's ear as he spoke, his voice low and full of something both tender and aching. "I don't know what this is, Jide, but I know it's not just about tonight. I've never felt anything like this. With you, not with anyone else." Jide's breath hitched at the words, but he said nothing at first. He simply held Tarek tighter, his hands gently cupping the back of his head, urging him closer. There was no need for more words. There was something so undeniable in the silence that passed between them, a shared understanding, a shared truth that transcended anything that could be spoken. Tarek's fingers drifted lower on Jide's body, and in the soft light of the room, their movements seemed to slow, become more deliberate. Jide's body responded to his touch, every inch of him alive with desire, and yet there was still something else beneath the surface, a connection. It wasn't just about the fire they had ignited, but about the comfort they offered each other. The trust that had formed between them wasn't instantaneous, but it was real. As Tarek's lips found Jide's once more, the kiss was slow, drawn out, and full of meaning. There was no rush now, no urgency, just a quiet, almost reverent exploration of each other. Every kiss was like a promise, every touch a declaration. The passion was there, yes, but so was something deeper. Tarek could feel the weight of Jide's past in the way his hands gripped him, in the way he held him close, as if he feared Tarek would disappear if he let go for even a moment. "Stay with me," Tarek whispered, breaking the kiss, his voice thick with emotion. "Stay with me, not just for now, but for everything. You've given me something I never knew I needed, Jide, and I won't let that go." Jide's eyes met his, dark and deep, the layers of emotion shifting within them. For a moment, there was a flicker of uncertainty, as if the weight of his own past, of the mistakes he had made, held him back. But then, as if making a decision, Jide's hand moved to Tarek's face, his thumb brushing against his cheek, and the vulnerability in his eyes deepened. "I don't have anything left to give," Jide said softly, but his voice lacked the bitterness it once had. But I can give you this. I can give you me, if that's enough. Tarek's heart skipped a beat. He didn't need Jide to offer him anything. He had already given him everything that mattered. This wasn't about the past or the future. This was about the now, the connection they shared, the intimacy that wasn't just physical, but emotional and spiritual. I don't need anything more than this, Tarek whispered back, leaning into Jide's touch. This is enough. Jide closed his eyes at the words, his hands pulling Tarek closer, their bodies coming together once again. The room seemed to fade away. It was just them, tangled in a web of desire, vulnerability, and quiet understanding. Every touch, every movement, became an affirmation of what they had shared and what they were becoming together. As their bodies moved in sync, the night stretched on, but was no longer just about passion or release. It was about the merging of two souls who had, in their own ways, been lost. But now, in each other's arms, they had found something far more valuable, a sense of belonging. The soft glow of dawn began to filter through the curtains, casting a warm, golden hue across the room. The night had passed quietly, but it left an indelible mark on both men. Tarek stirred slightly, the weight of Jide's arm draped over him grounding in a way that felt new, comforting, and strangely permanent. He had woken up many times in his life in luxurious settings, surrounded by wealth, power, and control. But this morning felt different. It felt real. Jide, still sleeping beside him, breathed softly, his face relaxed in a way that Tarek hadn't seen before. In the quiet of the early morning, there were no walls between them, no company to run, no expectations, no pretenses. They were simply two men in each other's arms. And for the first time in a long time, Tarek felt truly at peace. As his gaze lingered on Jide's face, Tarek thought about everything that had brought him here. He had spent his life climbing the ladder of success, accumulating wealth and power, believing that they would bring him the fulfillment he desperately craved. But it wasn't until Jide entered his life that he had discovered what true fulfillment felt like: vulnerability, connection, and intimacy. The things that Tarek had feared the most had now become the very things that gave his life meaning. Jide stirred, his eyes fluttering open slowly. When he saw Tarek looking at him, he offered a soft smile, one that reached his eyes in a way that was disarming. "You've been watching me sleep," Jide said quietly, his voice thick with sleep, but also laced with something more: affection. Tarek's lips curled into a smile, and he brushed a strand of Jide's hair back from his forehead, his hand lingering on his skin. "I couldn't help it. I've been thinking about how much has changed in such a short time." Jide nodded, his gaze softening. "Yeah, me too." The weight of their shared silence was not uncomfortable, but rather full of understanding. There was no need for words between them. They had shared something the night before that was more than just physical. It was an emotional awakening, and both of them knew it. They had found something in each other that neither had ever expected. "I've never felt more seen," Tarek confessed softly. He shifted, moving slightly closer to Jide, his body instinctively seeking the warmth of his embrace. "Not by anyone else, not by the world, but by you." Jide didn't speak at first. Instead, he leaned in, brushing his lips against Tarek's forehead, a simple but intimate gesture that sent a jolt through Tarek's chest. It wasn't just affection. It was something more, something deep, a promise, a connection, a future. "I see you, Tarek," Jide whispered, his voice hushed, but his words rang clear. "And I think, for the first time in a long while, I see myself too." There was a long pause, as if both men were savoring the weight of that statement. For Jide, this was a rebirth, a chance to build something new. And for Tarek, it was an opportunity to shed the layers of pride, ambition, and isolation he had buried himself in. Tarek kissed Jide softly, the kiss slow and deliberate, almost reverent. This time it was different. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't about desire alone. It was about something more profound, healing, connection, and surrender. As their bodies came together once more, this time it wasn't just about the passion they had shared the night before. It was about embracing the vulnerability they both had fought so long to hide. Every touch, every kiss, was a declaration of trust, a promise that they wouldn't pull away, even when life got hard. The days that followed were a blur of new beginnings and quiet realizations. Tark and Jide spent hours together, talking, laughing, sharing pieces of their lives that had never been spoken aloud before. They began to understand each other in ways they hadn't expected. Tark found himself opening up about his past, the isolation he had lived in, and the fear that had always accompanied his success. Jide, in turn, shared the pain of his own journey, his rise to success, his painful fall from grace, and the years spent wandering the streets, trying to reclaim his identity. Through it all, their bond deepened. It wasn't about the money or the power. It wasn't about the business deals or the engineering solutions. It was about two people finding each other in the midst of their brokenness and being whole together. It was about trust, the kind of trust that wasn't built overnight, but one that had been forged in the quiet moments, in the whispers of shared vulnerability. Their connection became something undeniable, something that transcended all else. Tark was no longer just a CEO, and Jide was no longer just a beggar. They were partners in every sense of the word. Together, they began to look forward to a future that was uncertain, but full of promise. The company, once on the brink of collapse, now flourished under Tark's leadership. But with Jide by his side, they tackled each challenge together, knowing that their strength came not from their individual success, but from the love and trust they had built. And so, as the months passed, the bond between Tark and Jide grew stronger. What had started as a chance encounter had blossomed into a deep, emotional connection, one that neither of them had expected, but both of them now needed. They faced the world together, hand in hand, knowing that no matter what came their way, they would never be alone.